Calling the meeting to order. Going to read the announcement. The Board of Alder Notice, New Haven. The Public Safety Committee of New Haven Board of Alders will meet in person at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, July 19th, 2022 at 6 p.m. in the Board of Alders Chambers located at 165 Church Street, New Haven, Connecticut, second floor, to hold a workshop to brief the Board of Alders on the efforts of the Connecticut Against Gun Violence Coalition to assist the City of New Haven create an Office of Violence Protection. Per order, Honorable Wingate, Chair, attest Honorable Michael Smart, City Town Clerk. For any accessibilities related accommodations, please contact 203-946-7651 or 203-946-8582 TTY. Per the City of New Haven's COVID protocol, masks are required for those in attendance. We do have masks that's up on in the front here on the desk. You're welcome to grab one. I'm going to introduce myself, starting with me, then I'm going to go to my right. I'm going to start with all my committee members. I am Conda Smith, co-chair, Ward 30.
Geraldine Antunes, senior member, Ward 12.
Frank Douglas, Ward 2, not a member of the committee, but honored to be here.
Alder Singh, Ward 5, committee member.
Alder Carmen Rodriguez, Ward 6. Thank you for inviting me, Alder Smith.
Alder National Smith, Ward 1.
Alder Tom Copeland, Ward 28, committee member.
Thank you, board committee members, and also alders that are joining. I'm going to ask the invited guests to come up. Please state your name, your address.
Yes.
Carlos Lombardo, 87.
Jeremy Stein, Executive Director of Connecticut Against Gun Violence for Homestead, Fairfield, Connecticut.
Sean Reeves, Community Engagement Coordinator for Connecticut Against Gun Violence, 188 Hazel Street, New Haven, Connecticut.
DJ Tyler, Department of Community Resilience, 55 East Cross Street, New Haven, Connecticut.
Thank you all for coming. As you know, tonight is a workshop, and we would like to hear from you on how you're doing, what you're doing, and also how can we curb this issue on gun violence. So give us a recap of what's going on with the department, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for giving us a space and have a conversation with you about what we're doing around our projects on gun violence prevention and intervention initiatives. As you may be aware, over the fall of 2021, we established the Office of Violence Prevention along with the new Department of Community Resilience and other offices under the department. We have then gone ahead and entered a contract with the Connecticut Against Gun Violence. It's a non-for-profit that does advocacy throughout the state. We contracted with them through a request for proposals process. They were selected as a vendor to help us create a blueprint for the Office of Violence Prevention. As part of the work, they have been doing some listening sessions in different neighborhoods and with different groups across the city to gather input from constituents around what we should be doing to address gun violence as a community. We are now in the final stages of the process, and we're here today because they would like to listen to you. They would like to listen for you as You're residents of the city, you're leaders in your wards, and we would love to hear some input for you as what we should be doing as a city to address gun violence. The goal at the end of the month is to receive a blueprint from Jeremy and his team, so that we can have a roadmap for the Office of Violence Prevention that can also help us map out activities that we can do as a city and as an office to address gun violence in that city. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Smith. So we're grateful to be here. We are honored to be able to help the city of New Haven to address what is a public health crisis. I mean, plain and simple, and that's how we approach this, is that this gun violence is a public health crisis. And we have been responsible for the last 30 years to help Connecticut as a state enact some of the strongest gun laws and life-saving measures, as well as being able to be a sounding board and a subject matter expert for presidents and mayors and governor and others to be able to try to address gun violence at the state, city, and town level. So when the mayor and the city of New Haven and Dr. Dalal reached out to us to try to help with this problem, this is a huge task, and it is a multifaceted problem, gun violence. That you and I have talked about this before, and it deserves a multifaceted, complex solution. To be honest, 6 months is only a little bit of time to be able to tackle this problem, which is going to be a long-term solution. And so one of the things that we are doing, and just to clarify, we will not be running this Office of Violence Prevention. We are not responsible for running it. We've been tasked with the job of trying to help create a strategy for the team that is going to be taking it over. I know the city is in the process of hiring someone to be the director of the Office of Violence Prevention under the leadership of Carlos and Dr. Dalal. And what we're in the process of doing is creating this blueprint that we have been able to look at research. First, I guess, to form the team, the first thing that we realized when we were doing this was this is a local problem and deserves local solutions and deserves input from the community. And so before we did anything, we realized that we needed to have somebody that understood the problem firsthand, that lived in the community, and that had connections with the community. And so we hired Sean Reeves, who's to my left, who understands gun violence firsthand, having lost his own son to gun violence. He has been instrumental in helping us connect with the community in framing this problem as a public health issue and making sure that we were talking to the right people and the right stakeholders. The second thing that we did, we wanted to make sure that as we were forming this blueprint, we can't do this alone, and we shouldn't do this alone. And this is something that needs that input of the community. And so we engaged in a series of listening sessions throughout the city of New Haven. And we've been doing this for the last 6 months. We've spoken to over 250 people. We've spoken to police chiefs, plural, I think 3 chiefs we've spoken to, hospitals, doctors, teachers, stakeholders who have gun violence prevention organizations such as Leonard Jihad and Project More. We've spoken to organizations that do this kind of work, not just in New Haven, but throughout the state of Connecticut and Bridgeport and around the country. And we engage these communities in a series of sessions to understand not only how they view gun violence, but how it impacts them, to hear their stories, right? To hear firsthand some people who have lost multiple children, fathers, sisters, husbands, and then to listen to what they think are some of the solutions, what they think some of the problems are, what's working, what's not working. And every community is different, right? Every community, what may be true for Fairhaven may not be true for New Hallville. And we wanted to make sure that we were honoring the community and listening to them. And the other thing that we did as we structured this is we wanted to make sure that as we were doing this trauma-informed work, that what we had seen in the past was these community meetings, these roundtables that we have, where we see the mayor and the police chief and then the community. And what ends up happening is the trauma increases, right? You hear people talking about the worst day of their lives. And then the person to the left will hear this and say, like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I also lost my son, right? And somebody else will tell the story about how bad gun violence is. And then everybody gets up and leaves. And no one's getting help. And they go home, and now this trauma is worse. So one of the things that we made sure that we did when we did these listening sessions, we did not want to make the problem worse. And so we had mental health providers right there, available during the listening sessions and after the listening session. When we did both on Zoom and live versions of this, when we did the live versions, we did one at the Q House, we had someone, mental health provider in the next room. And we told people, look, if you need to take a break, you can talk to somebody in private, somebody that can help you through this. And if you need some help afterwards, they can help connect you with a social worker or a psychologist, somebody that can help you get mental health. And we're grateful to Clifford Beers that helped us with this as well. And we listened and we gained valuable information and data. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure is, though, when we did these listening sessions, we wanted people to feel safe. We wanted to make sure this was confidential. And so we did a series of listening sessions outside of the police, outside of politicians, outside of elected officials. We made sure that people felt safe and they didn't feel like there was something else that could influence their answers. But we also made sure that we separate listening sessions for police. And we also want to make sure that we have a listening session for the alders. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today is, I'm going to stop talking and I want to hear from you. I want to hear from all of you because you know your communities, best, and you need to be a part of this blueprint. Like, we need to know what your opinions are about your districts and how you think gun violence looks and feels, but also what are some of the solutions with working and what's not working. And I'd be happy to answer any additional questions. Sean, do you want to talk a little bit about the listening sessions and how we did that and some of the questions we've asked?
Before you go on, I would like to recognize the alders for Ward 1, Ward 14, and Ward 27. And also, I would like to recognize the alders from Ward 28. If any of the alders want to come up and join us, please feel free to come up and join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, my name is Sean Reeves. I'm a New Haven resident. I've been living in New Hallville 49 years of it this year. In 2011, my oldest son was killed to community gun violence. And since then, I've been, working tirelessly to try and figure out different ways and opportunities for community residents to become more empowered to take charge of their communities. So we've conducted several listening sessions. The heart of those listening sessions began in the 6 low-income neighborhoods: New Hallville, Westville, Dwight, the Hill, Fairhaven, and West Rock. So, the goal was to really get community residents, those that have been impacted, those that may have not personally been impacted, but are impacted on a daily basis as far as the level of their communities are concerned and their quality of living. We've talked to numerous people, numerous times in all of these communities, and the message has been the same. Our residents are living in a state of panic, a state of constant fear. And they want to address these problems. They just have a high level of hopelessness through all the past experiences. One of the things that we did was present a process where they actually got a chance to listen to themselves after the fact of their listening sessions and weigh in on all the information that was taken from them. So that way we can make sure that everything that they stated is pretty much verbatim and presented back properly, in these recommendations. Our follow-up will be, once we establish this set of recommendations, our goal is to make sure that every resident that we talk to has those recommendations in their hands via email, so that way they can actually continue along this process and making sure that the things that we have recommended kind of take shape. You know, again, one of the things we realize is that if the residents don't hold space, just as if our alders don't hold space and don't really buy into the process, it's going to be just that much of a tougher battle for us to climb up this hill. You know, so constantly engaging the residents, and the goal is to stay engaged with the residents even after this process happens, because one of the asks was that we continue these community roundtables and listening sessions with the residents to help them figure out different ways to start targeting success stories in their communities for change. We've asked a couple of questions, and these are pretty much the same questions that we wanted to ask, you know, to the automatic panel, which was, how does gun violence in your neighborhood affect your everyday life and the lives of people you care about? And if you can give us some examples. Question number 2 was, who is the most at risk for present and future violence in your communities? And question 3, what do you think would help make your community safer? What programs are you aware of in your community? How well are they working? And how can we make them better? You know, the goal is to inform residents that might not be aware of some of the things that are actually happening, to empower them to be more, to utilize the resources that the city has available for them. And then again, to gain some additional insight on future practices with them included in the conversations and in the process of changing our community gun violence issues. So, you know, like, this is really the main reason why we're here. You know, one of the things that I stated to Jeremy as a community resident is our automatic committee. You guys are our community leaders. You make huge decisions that affect all of our residential areas. And without you guys in this process, it's that much more difficult to get it right, because we all have to work together in order to ensure that this can be as successful as it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Anyone else have any? Yes, we tried like that. You have anything?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to my committee members, and I just want to make sure that you guys understand, this is a workshop. You can ask questions and have some suggestions. Starting with, to my right, you have any questions, Alder? Answers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Interesting, your questions were the same questions I was going to ask you. So I would look to you for those answers. However, I did put together 1 or 2. You say you have had some of these talking sessions or listening sessions. And what do you see as the cause of the gun violence, and how would you look to address it?
So again, I really stepped into rooms to listen to other residents. I don't have all the answers, but one thing we do know is systemic racism, poverty is one of the root causes of gun violence in our communities. And until we put together some type of plan to address our economic instabilities, along with trauma services and things like that, community residents are going to have much more of a difficulty empowering themselves. They're disconnected from almost every resource that they feel that they need inside of their environments. I talk to residents, they call me regularly now that they know I'm kind of more involved in this work, and parents just from things like, midnight basketball, having places to hold spaces for children, to play chess, to play any type of video games, just safe places inside of neighborhoods. We don't have them. And those were some of the conversations. There's a million camps, but there's still a million kids that don't have camps to go to because they can't afford them. The parents might not have internet access to be able to get the emails or the information to sign their children up for these things, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's not a one-off, but, the goal is to work with residents, to work with the city, to work with other municipalities, to come together in a joint venture to solve this issue.
Okay, I'll just ask one more. What can a community do to help resolve or address the problem?
So, I think part of it is exactly what we're talking about, and it is engaging, right? There is this feeling of helplessness that, for obvious reasons, people feel like this keeps happening. What we've heard in these listening sessions, just by way of example, let me give you an example of some of the things we heard. Quote, my 15-year-old son was murdered. We're not supposed to bury our kids. The guy don't realize he murdered my whole family that night. This is from a listening session that we had. We also did, in addition to just talking to communities, we did 2 sessions in Project More, talking to people that were coming back into the community after spending some time in jail. And some of the things that we heard were, it is easier to get a gun than it is to get a job. People told us repeatedly that they felt safer in jail than they did outside of jail in their community, right? And they felt disengaged, they felt helpless. And I think that this is, whether we're talking about gun violence, we're talking about the pandemic, we're talking about all these things, I think this permeates the community. And I think there's something that needs to be done in there. And part of this is this community engagement, right? The community has to be involved if we're going to solve this problem. We got to solve this problem together. And apathy is only going to increase gun violence. Inaction is only going to increase gun violence. Not going to the coal is not going. Is only going to increase gun violence. But at the same time, I think there has to be a coordination of efforts, right? It's not just, you can't arrest our way out of this problem, right? It's got to be a coordination of efforts. And I know the press initiative is a foundation for that. And the Department of Community Resilience is a foundation for that. It is trying to unite different services at the same time. It's trying to make sure that all of these people at the same table, whether we're talking about police or education or homelessness or mental health, like the solutions have to be holistic. And part of that holistic solution has to involve the community. And so their input is crucial to this as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Augustine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My mind is going with this here, and because of the violence in our town. We have a state and a city. The city is more of the cleanup end of this tragedy and violence. I think the state needs to do more of stopping the gun from coming in the states. I mean, if we kind of put a hold on stopping the gun from coming, we're going to start to eliminate some of these shooting and violence, and we don't have to deal with this time. So we have to look at the core where it's coming from. And if we don't do that, all we're going to do is keep cleaning up after one after the other. So I think, the law enforcement from the state side, they need to track more of these straw sales in the south where these guns are coming from, and they need to police this better.
Yeah, and this is, this is exactly what we've been doing in listening sessions. Is I think that you make an excellent point. And it is difficult for the city of New Haven to say we're going to stop the guns from Maine, right, or from Florida. And we know that the laws in the state, we have some of the strongest gun laws in the country, and as a result, we have some of the lowest gun death rate in the country. But we can't make Maine or Florida or Georgia or Texas create the same laws that we have, and Congress just starting to pass gun laws now, and what they did with their bill is a start, but it's nowhere near where Connecticut is right now. And so, and even if we decided today, even if Congress decided today, hey, we're gonna create the same laws that we have in Connecticut, the problem is the guns are already here. And so there's three things that we've been looking at, you know, and I really want to hear from you all, but there's three kind of buckets that we look at when we're talking about gun violence: intervention, prevention, intervention, and aftercare. And so the solutions aren't all the same. We need to be looking at solutions that are going to prevent the shooting from happening. We need to, then if the shooting is about to happen or happened already, that's intervention to prevent the next shooting from happening. And then there's aftercare. What do we do about the survivors of gun violence? What do we do about the families of gun violence? And I think this approach, the reason why we talked about this kind of approach is gun violence, you know, with strong gun laws, we are targeting the supply of guns, as we were talking about, right? We need to eliminate the supply or greatly reduce the supply of guns. But when we're talking about urban gun violence, community level gun violence, we also have to be looking at the demand for guns, right? Because the presence of guns, there's plenty of guns in places like Greenwich and Darien and Ridgefield and places like that, but there isn't the same type of demand for guns that there is in our cities. And, you know, and that has to do with resources and root causes of gun violence and opportunity and things like that, which the office, you know, we should be addressing in the city should be addressing. But, you know, you're right. If we could, you know, we're looking at countries like Australia and New Zealand and places like that, they don't have the same kind of gun problem that we have because they don't have the same number of guns and they don't have the same type of access and guns and things like that.
One moment, Chair. And my observance, I could speak from my neighborhood. I mean, 2 weeks ago, there was violence in my neighborhood. And I see this was coming. I spoke to the lieutenant about this. You know, we have people gathering there 24 hours and was only time that this was going to happen. So we're there gathering, only time. So we need to work on that in law enforcement. And once we can work on that, the large gathering, we can avoid some of these problems. Once the gatherings start to get large, it's get out of hand, and that's what happened there. And, I saw it coming. And yeah, personally, I complained, my colleagues, we complained to the law enforcement.
Madam Chair, is it okay if I ask questions freely?
In just a second.
Okay.
Alder Strickland, you have questions?
Not at the moment.
All right. Thank you. Before I go to the other alders that are not in the committee, I have a couple of questions. Or suggestions rather. I think, you know, the biggest problems in which that we have is the internet with these guns that are being made, the ghost guns. And I feel that we need to lobby against these people that are actually creating these ghost guns because they can get a pieces nailed right back in and you just carving out a hole so where the bullet can come out of. And that's a lot of what we're finding in our communities, that these young people or whoever the shooters are, they're using a lot of these ghost guns. Internet is very easy for them to get through, so we need to do something to create a law in regards to that. Secondly, I believe within the dealerships where they're buying guns from, I believe that every gun that a person were to buy, you need to have a stipulation on how many, and they all need to be registered with their local police department. And lastly, then, which that I want to state that I think I just said all of them, and which needs to happen. Gun violence is real. We all know that. We face this every day. This is a norm. Like, and people are getting comfortable knowing that, hey, it's just somebody down the street shooting a gun. Some people are getting on with that. Some people, it's very traumatized to them. Especially when you have children that when they hear a car backfire, they think it's a gun and they dive into the floors. So I personally think that we need to have more social workers in areas of which that relates to people of color more of them working together. Because when I find in my community, when I'm walking, I ask people, what if I get you some help? Let me give you help. They're afraid, for one, of receiving help because they're afraid that DCF is coming to take their children. And that's a big problem. But when you bring someone that is of the same ethnicity of them, they'll talk to them all day long. Secondly, we need to do more and have more of the street outreach workers out on the streets, do more hiring of them because I believe they do a great job of being into these communities. They know people that are in the communities. And we have to occupy space. We have to occupy the corners. Even your team needs to occupy corners where you know that this violence is actually happening at. And I don't see enough of that that's happening. We want normalcy in our communities. We want normalcy in the city of New Haven, and that we don't have right now, and which is going on. So I'm going to yield and hold my other suggestions, Alder Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not a member of the committee, but I do have my thought of this whole thing, and that is, I believe we have to focus more on the mindset. We have a large and growing problem with mental illness, and I believe that's where the main focus should be spotlighted. Younger kids, very young kids, we've got to change their minds, how we react to each other. That's where the violence starts. It starts in the home, but kids bring it to school, they bring it to the playground, and before you know it, they got a gun in their hand. They don't know how to deal with the problems that they're faced with, reacting with each other. Anger management is something that we ought to focus on. That's a big problem. What's that old saying? Well, it's not an old saying, but it's a new saying. If you see something, say something. In the homes, we see our kids, we see young kids get away with things. We think they're funny. So they think that it's okay to do these things. Before you know it, it escalates and they're walking around dangerous young people. We have to focus in on the mental health problem that we face every day.
Thank you, Alder Douglas. Alder Furlow.
I have nothing at this time, Madam Chair, but thank you for accommodating this and hosting this briefing.
Thank you. That's Majority Leader. Alder Miller. I'm sorry. I thought I was, please forgive me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with a lot of what's been said. Thank you. My children are 8 and 11, and they both now can distinguish between a car backfire and gunshots, which is to me pretty heartbreaking. I really agree with what you said about street outreach workers. I think that we've been waiting in Fairhaven for a year. We understand there's funding, but we still don't have anybody. We really need more street level presence, both from street outreach workers and from police just walking the beat. So that's something that I hope we can see going forward. The other thing that we often don't want to talk about because we don't have control over it is our school system. And we know that there's a dotted line between how many kids can read in 3rd grade and how many prisons we built. And the majority of our kids do not know how to read in 3rd grade in our public schools. And we have to be realistic about the impact of that and think about what we can do to put pressure on the school system to really meet kids' academic needs, also all their other needs, but certainly as a foundational skill to make sure that we're prioritizing making sure that our kids learn.
Thank you, Alder Miller. Alder Rodriguez.
I have no questions at this time. Thank
Alder
you.
Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for today. I just have a couple questions and a suggestion. First, I'd like to know what does the blueprint consists of, but does it deal with both staffing and operations?
So we're still in the process of creating the blueprint. We're gonna sit down with the city and go over in terms of, we're not gonna be specific as to we need to hire these people. And quite frankly, there is a very limited budget in which to operate this. And we're hoping that the blueprint itself is going to be a long-term strategy. And some of the things that we suggest in the blueprint are going to be long-term and may not be able to be accomplished based on the level of funding so far. We're hoping that because of the increased priority that the federal government has put on this, and we're hoping that that will then trickle down to the state. We know from the Bipartisan Safety Act that there is 150 million, don't quote me on that, I'm sorry, we're being recorded. I think it's somewhere, I can't remember the specific number, but there's significant funding the federal government is putting into community violence interruption and intervention programs, as we've heard. And that could include street outreach. So if that funding is available, we know that's going to be available to the states. They don't know exactly how that is going to be available. We are being told that it's going to be directly available to the states. If that is available to the state, we're hoping that the city of New Haven can tap into some of those resources and then possibly increase their budget to be able to provide these things. Those are decisions that are going to have to be made in terms of what is going to be funded and what can't be funded. Those are going to be decisions that the Office of Violence Prevention Director will have to make in conjunction with Carlos Lombardo, in conjunction with CSA. And so we are available after this is done to assist the city of New Haven. We're still, Connecticut Against Gun Violence is still around. We are willing to assist in any way we can, and hoping, whether it's addressing strengthening our post gun ban or increasing funding, we're going to continue to do that to make sure this problem is handled and make sure that gun violence is reduced in New Haven. Like I said, this is not going to be happening overnight. And what's contained in the blueprint is not going to be a quick fix. This is going to be long-term solutions, and it's going to have to be adjusted as time goes on. We know that other cities and other states throughout the country are doing similar things. We're connected to the National Office of Violence Prevention Network through the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. And this is a moving target, for lack of a better term, and we're going to take best practices and incorporate that into this blueprint.
Next question is it within the vision of the Office of Violence Prevention and consideration of the partnership they have developed to work with other city agencies in order to address some of the root causes of gun violence, such as the most impoverished neighborhood being historically and chronically underserved?
The short answer to that is on the table.
Thank you. And then last, just a suggestion. I remember 20 New Hopeville, we experience gun violence on a daily basis. And I echo the sentiments of all my colleagues. Basically, I just want to give us everything that they said. But I would suggest that the office partner with other departments within the city to maintain sustained funding and programming for the youth and adults that's specifically targeted towards anti-violence. For example, educational events, but also skill building opportunities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Alder Smith kind of stimulated my thought process. And I want to respond to the fact that we're trying to stop the bleeding, but we're also trying to prevent further bleeding. Let me get to my comment, and it might not be appropriate for your mandate. But just as you were talking, Jim, I'm not sure what your timetable is for your final submission. And not that numbers or data can always solve the problem, but I'm curious if you're able, my mind goes to McKinsey and other consulting firms. If in a perfect world, it seems to me that you would want to assess the effectiveness of Project More, assess the effectiveness of Spacey, Spacey's left Project Longevity, assess the folks being released today as we speak, work further the reading issue that Sarah mentioned. So you mentioned the word holistic. But I don't think we all understand or really appreciate how appropriate that term is, but also how detailed we really have to get into the weeds. So looking at, I'm not sure if you have time to, and I'm not trying to say that the top the project more. But the data about people that are getting released, the data about how many people, how many young people between 11 and 1800 BCF care, the data on how many, do we have data on how many guns are sold? We have data on the last 4, 5, or 6 gun callbacks, how many people have contributed to that from a marketing standpoint. So there's a lot of strands of information that I think we need to weld together in a web of proactive decision making. And again, whether you have time to do that, whether you have the resources to do that, whether the new organization can do that. But it seems to me that a lot of us are out there working in the fields, but still being able to coordinate our efforts in a, if not a daily, but a regular feedback mechanism of information, data, action strategy. Whether the chief has his meetings every week, but the chief has, what's the name of the meetings? The concept means if you look at the trend of that for the last 6 or 7 years. Just coordinating the various efforts. There are a lot of soldiers on the battlefield as I see it, and we really want to. This is the invasion of Normandy. This is a major effort that can't be considered to be just one battle. Global strategy.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, all. They're very great thoughts. If I may, just one more check. So we are constantly monitoring progress of the Reentry Welcome Center across the board. We constantly get numbers, we constantly evaluate cases. We're actually about to go through case reviews. We may have a subject matter expert in criminal justice to help us go through a process and create a toolkit to actually review cases and understand why people are receiving. We have a low number of people receiving data right now. I think the numbers are 5% within 6 months. We are now looking at getting another midpoint measurement after the first year has passed. So I'm more than happy to share reports with you about that. We have also partnered the Jail Justice Collaborative to evaluate even action research evaluation. CTIP, Connecticut Violence Prevention Program, as well as Project Safe Neighborhoods. So they are looking at cases that happened in the past 2 years and look at how the cases, the outcome of the cases, and what the results are. The evaluations, my understanding, will take about a year to 2 years to complete. So I'm looking forward to seeing those results and being able to provide technical support to our partner agencies to improve their systems. We also created a new initiative called the Program for Reintegration, Engagement, Safety, and Support, which is a collaborative between Project MORE, Project Longevity, CTIP, and PSN, where we bring together all service providers on a weekly basis to micro-target better those people who are at the highest risk of shooting. So we have street outreach workers, social workers, case managers, working intensively with people who are in the streets and are at the biggest risk of shooting somebody or becoming a victim. We are also in the process of hiring a professional evaluator to help us figure out whether that whole initiative is actually effective or not. So we're hoping to enter a contract with UNH very soon to evaluate that company as well. We have partnered very closely with the health department to track data, true data, perpetrator data, victim data across the city over the past 5 years to help us figure out where the trends are and where we should be targeting our outreach efforts better and making sure that we just keep track of what's going on in the trend, what's going on every year, and making sure to see whether our interventions are effective or not. And with that being said, I'll pass it on to you, Jeremy, so you can address the other questions.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of all this is that we've been working together for the last 6 months, and we've been helping to facilitate meetings and there's been a lot of partners involved in this whole process, and I think all the Hicklands, you're spot on about your assessment of this. And congratulations, by the way, I think you're the newest holder, right? So,
Second oldest.
but I think, part of this blueprint is going to have a big portion about assessment, accountability, measuring. Even when we did these listening sessions, we were grateful enough to be able to partner with the Department of Public Health and Dorothy Cohen, who provided a lot of data and a lot of calls. We would start with like heat maps with the cameras, but we would start with heat maps in each district to say, like, look, this is what the data shows gun violence in your neighborhood being, but you may not agree with that. This is what the data shows, but does that sound right to you? You live in this community, it might be different to you. And so we wanted to make sure that we were looking at data, but we also wanted to compare individuals' experience in that community with the data, because data in and of itself is not the only thing that we need to be looking at. Same thing with CompStat. CompStat, we look at gun homicides, but we also need to be looking broader in terms of shooting incidents, and there's a lot of data that the Department of Public Health has been, their epidemiologists called through to not just look at homicides, which may be a factor of healthcare and who's on call and the distance to the hospital, the type of caliber used. We also have to be looking at the shootings itself, and there's a lot of data out there with spot shot or things like that they have to cull through. But in terms of evaluating programs, and I think that the press initiative has gotten a tremendous start about this. We're very mindful of looking at this type of assessment and accountability. Really, when I say accountability, that's a big part of this. It's not just working with organizations, it's also seeing like, is what we're funding working? Is the city funding these solutions, and then to looking at what the success of these programs are? Not just in a negative way, but in a positive way. And what I mean by that is there should be technical assistance that's provided to these organizations as well, because we want them to succeed. We want to make sure that these organizations like CTVIP and Project Longevity that are funded, that they succeed if that's the right solution, right? And so they should be provided with the assistance that's necessary to develop metrics that can measure success. And I think, Alder Smith, you and I talked about this earlier about not all metrics are going to show a picture immediately. If you talk about graduation rates, right? You got to wait a long time before somebody graduates from first grade to high school. So you may want to look at other things, mental health. Are they happy? Are the teacher feedback, student feedback, parent feedback? And the same thing applies to gun violence. It's not just about, is gun violence being reduced or is it increased? It's also looking at other factors. Job placement, are the communities more active? Are the communities happier? Are there resources being provided? Is quality of life increased? And I think, the short answer or the long answer to all this is gun violence reduction is a quality of life issue. The root causes of gun violence have to do with quality of life also.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask the Alder from Ward 1 if he had any questions or suggestions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for the presentation. I just wanted to echo my colleagues' earlier comments, specifically around representation, whether it be in staff, youth workers, programming, even materials. We're talking about cultural barriers, we're talking about language barriers, even in the city like New Haven. We're not just talking about Spanish or Arabic, Chinese even, and can't really expect someone to report crime or gun violence accurately if the systems aren't in place to be able to speak in a language that best represents what the person's trying to report. And again, I just really want to really echo that point because representation matters, especially in an issue that affects communities. Which many of the projects represent. So I really just wanted to echo that and say how important that matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or suggestions that alders that did not have any may have from them? Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all. And my mind is going here. And how much gun incident it would take for us, for city gun to recommend a task force, a gun task force for the police department to partner with the FBI and the tobacco and firearm to track these gun shows, internet, and so where these guns are coming from. If that would be part of the blueprint, what would be the magic number to say that we need a task force? Thank you, Madam Chair.
So the state just increased funding for a gun trafficking task force, and also there's increased penalties and focus on the congressional bipartisan bill, and they just appointed a brand new ATF director last week, I think. I think at the state and the national level, we're going to see more focus on gun trafficking. Whether the city should have their own version of that, I think first we have to see what the effect of the national and the state level, and to have all these pieces put in place first, because there's a brand new ATF director, and I think we're gonna see how this is all coordinated. And coordinating city efforts and state efforts and federal efforts all at once is hard, but I do know that I believe the chief of police sits on a call every week where the partners are all there. There's state attorney, federal officers, federal prosecutors, FBI, et cetera, and they do talk about this. So I think it's already in place. Whether or not the city needs to spend money on its own task force, I think that right now there's a limited amount of money that is being spent on the Office of Violence Prevention and in other services, as we've heard tonight. A lot of these things, whether we're talking about street outreach workers or education or interpreters, like there's a cost to all these things, and I think we have to ask ourselves, and the city has to ask itself, where is the priority? Is it on law enforcement, or is it on funding community level solutions and education and things like that? And I think those are some of the questions that have to be answered by the Office of Violence Prevention.
The priority is stopping the gun violence, stop the bleeding. That's the priority. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I think that the question is, which is going to be more effective? Is it stopping the flow of guns or addressing the root causes of demand? Is it a supply issue? Is it a demand issue, or is it both? And I think it's both, but I think because there's limited funding on these solutions, I think it is important to prioritize what is more important and what is going to have the greatest effect on stopping the violence. I think that the city should concentrate on local issues, and that the state should concentrate on, I think the state and the federal government, it's very difficult to stop gun trafficking outside of the state of Connecticut or into the state of Connecticut by a city entity. And I think that it's really important that the city collaborate, and the collaboration is important, just as the Department of Community Resilience is doing through its own initiative. I think police also have to collaborate with national partners and state, multiple state entities. How can we partner with Massachusetts? How can we partner with New Jersey and New York? And I do know law enforcement and mayors, governors all consider this as well.
Thank you, Alder Douglas.
I'll go back to what I was saying. It goes back to the beginning. What makes a person want to kill somebody else? And I think that's the root of the problem. That's what we need to be addressing. That's my personal opinion. I think that's where it needs to be. And I think it's all mental health. And I think we need to stop pouring more money into those programs to addressing that problem. I'm just stuck on that. Thank you.
Can I speak for 1 second, Madam Order? Alder Singh, Alder Douglas, you opened at your trial. And I want to give us a small story. The first time I witnessed gun violence, I was 13. I was playing Russian roulette and wanted to kill myself. Since 16, every single year of my life, I've experienced a gun-related homicide of a person that I know. And just looking at my kids, my youngest son was 4, my youngest daughter was 5, and my brother was taken from me. And since then, there has been no end to the trauma that they experience. Everyday gunshots, can't go to the park. My daughter's now 15. I won't let her walk to the store alone for fear of anything happening to her. And this is me as an adult who has cognitive sense now, knows how to express himself, and knows how to navigate the jungle that I've grown up in. We're dealing with children now who are experiencing gun violence at an all-time high early in their lives and have untreated trauma for more than 15 and 20 years. Most of them don't feel safe or don't feel like they have a safety net. As they get older, they get more adapted to reaching for a firearm as a safety net. We have to correct that. If we can stop people from wanting firearms, then we can stop people from using firearms.
Thank you. Do anyone else have any more questions? Any of my colleagues?
One quick follow-up. Actually for you. You had said earlier, occupy, actually I have a lot of questions. You had said you need to occupy the corners. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Half of the time, drug sells and goes on corners. People are vibing for their spots. And that's where a lot of you find the violence, because if someone went to jail, lost that spot, they come back out, they want that spot back again. So it creates the gun violence begin to happen because they're fighting over the spot that they have. If we took over every corner that we definitely know of where this is occurring, because we all know where it's going to occur. We know when the violence is going to happen. I sort of have it all triggered down from the weekends. Soon when Friday hits at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the gunshot starts all over the city. So it doesn't take a rocket science to follow these incidents that are going on. Why does it happen? That's the biggest question. I mentioned to you earlier in regards to the internet. You have a lot of these youth are writing songs, putting it on the internet, talking about how many bodies that they have, who they have taken, and they're utilizing these slang versions that they know their own code. So if you're not listening to them, you're not following the code. They're talking about the beef that they having from the 8 to the Ville to the Hill. So you know what's gonna happen next, because when you follow their Twitter accounts and follow what's gonna happen, somebody's gonna get shot in the Hill tonight. What happened? Someone gets shot in the Hill. So when you occupy their spaces, because they know where they're at, because in their song, they're telling you where they're going to. So if we just only pay attention to what is happening on these accounts of what these young people, and you know who the trouble people are, you know where they're gonna be at. If you're on that street, and you know we are, you know where they're gonna be at any given time. So the perpetrators know who they want, and they're gonna come right at them. So when you occupy their spaces, they don't have a place to stand at. They're gonna move, they're gonna shift. You're gonna shift them out till you shift them till they know, I can't be here because someone's gonna be on this corner. So they're gonna have to eventually give up.
So, thank you, Elizabeth. A lot of what we heard from the different communities were the same thing, similar things, and there were some solutions that I'd be curious to know where you stand. Some people talk about greater police presence on the corners, right? That the police have to occupy the corners. Other people said it should be community people, that there should be some kind of community watch on the corners, and that there used to be things like that, but there aren't anymore. And then some people had suggested businesses or community centers, or that if if you provide something on that corner that has value to the community rather than just an empty lot or a liquor store or something like that, then perhaps they would, not occupy that corner or something else. Do you have an idea of whether it's all of those or some of those, or if you have something else that you could suggest?
I'm gonna tell you like one of my young people said to me this week, it doesn't matter where you at. You got some that wants to come off, get out of the violent scene, and then you got others just are not gonna come out of the violent scene. You have a lot of people that are youth out here couch surfing, they're homeless, they need help. And without jobs, I don't care how much you say that, you can't find everybody a job. Instead of creating all of these new programs, you need to create a job resource for these kids to get off the street. And when we begin to do that, you begin to take off those shooters off the street, giving them a job. They don't care what they're doing as long as they're making money and not making $40 standing on a corner for someone else. You give them something to give them hope so that they can come out of this and not go to jail by killing someone, right? And I think we'll make a big change by doing that. We have to invest. It's about an investment. Alderman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And honestly, you said most of what I was thinking. Because, I just want to kind of reiterate, this is more specific towards, the office of mentioned the program that's being made. I think it's important that within the office of prevention, there are a number of Sean Reeves directly involved, working there, directly involved in the day-to-day operations, programming, etc. You don't have Sean Reeves, but I need community people who have the experience and the skill sets to assist, because it is, I think there's often quite a distance between City Hall and some of our most impoverished neighborhoods. And a direct disconnection between where we know the neighborhoods are underserved, but where we're seeing resources go versus where they need to go. And a lot of times I find that insight comes best from the people who have lived experience and see on a day-to-day basis areas of opportunity. So I want to reiterate that strongly, that I think as part of the blueprint or just your talks, to have a real intentional discussion and planning around having community-based workers involved in some substantial capacity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Alder Miller.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one thing in response to your question. I don't think it matters that much whether it's community people or police or outreach workers occupying space. We've in our neighborhood, we've had to take over spaces as neighbors when it's gotten really bad. And it does stop the problem for a while, but that's not sustainable. There just needs to be a continuous street level presence, and it can take different forms. But people, there's nobody out there now. There's nobody out there talking to people saying, what are you doing? Get out of here. There's something better for you. Here's all other things you could be doing, and building those relationships. So I think it's more about style and what people are doing when they're out in the street rather than what kind of uniform they're wearing.
Thank you, Alder Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions or concerns or suggestions? Ask again. Any other questions, Mr. Jeremy?
If I can ask, for everyone, we talk a lot about what's not working or what we need, but I also think it's important to address what is, and you had mentioned CTWP or street. Is there anything that you think is working that we need to support more of?
once again, as I mentioned to you, in 2013-14, the street outreach workers were awesome. They curbed the violence that was happening in the city of New Haven up into 2019. It began to fall apart. I'm wondering whatever happened to that, because they were strong and violence have stopped literally we had 0 in crime rate. I believe we need more people that know people in the community, like Mr. Huggins, to be out on the street, because when you have a relationship with people and can walk up to people and really talk to them and find out where problems and issues are occurring, it gives more insight to our police department, where they can focus and put detail where they need to put the detail at. And then you have them to go up and say, hey, you need to knock it off, and bring these violators together and say, hey, you gotta either get it together, jail or in the grave, right? That was their motto, jail or in the grave. You don't wanna see that. We're tired of seeing our young people finding out that another young person got killed on the street. So I believe if you had an abundance of flood in each one of these communities, like Alder Smith stated, people that know that community, that know the people that are out here, to talk to them, to stop the violence from happening. But people have to respect you. If they don't respect you, you're not gonna get anything out of them, and they're not gonna do anything. So they need to build a relationship. Alder Fickle.
It's just dawned on me to say thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is kind of a pet desire, just collectively to explore the reinstitution of the young adult police commissioners. I can't assess I don't know if you could debate whether they were successful or not. But that structural intervention for the young people, we think that could have value moving forward with the young adult police commissioners. In addition, I'm told that the block watches are not founded too. But there needs to be a police person assigned to staffing or financial issue. And since we laid the economic comparative on the table, block watchers, in my mind, are again a structural component. You can see how my mind works in terms of structural components and just the building blocks of how you can build a strong sense of block watchers. Which again, we're talking about community people being part of this block watchers. Just everyone being deputized, basically, feeling deputized, really civic engagement way, and having structural arguments for people to feed into these particular strategies, components. Think about the quiver, various ways of various types of ammunition, safe and sound public health. Thank you.
Alder for Ward 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, again, echo Madam Chair's mention of having people that are respected in the community talk to youth or people affected by gun violence. And I think this goes back to the question you asked, what works, what do we think has worked in the past? And I think for me, what's worked in the past, really, or what I've seen work a lot, is when we build that culture of mentorship, we build that cycle, that system of mentorship. Because you can have really amazing people do great work in the community, but some people are not going to stay in the community their entire life. People have other things, family, other responsibilities that they've actually have to move on. And I think the biggest problem sometimes is that we thankfully rely on those people, but once they leave, there's not a system in place, or there's not that culture in place where someone can jump right in and be like, okay, this is what this person did. Let me jump right back into the work that they were doing. And I think that's a broad issue, and it affects a lot of different things. But I think especially when we're talking about programs or different initiatives, I think that's a big key of really having good work being done over decades, not just over 5, 6 years, but rather decades and decades of work to building that culture. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions, concerns, comments?
I would comment. I first wanted to say thank you. Again, this is needed. This is somewhat of what we wanted to, explore with the entire Board of Alders. Again, because you guys are neighborhood residents of the community, and then also, you guys are decision makers. But as human beings, everyday citizens, fathers, uncles, cousins, to residents inside of this community that have been impacted by gun violence, that continue to be impacted by gun violence. Your voices are needed just as much as anybody else. So again, I just say thank you.
Thank you all for coming to this workshop. I will now entertain a motion to close the public portion of this meeting.
Make a motion to close the public portion of this meeting, Madam Chair.
Second.
Wait a minute, I have to second it.
Second.
Thank you. It has been moved and second to close the public portion of the meeting. All in favor, say yea.
Yeah.
All opposed, say nay. Any objection? The motion carries. The public portion is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Don't let it stop there.
If anybody wants to reach me afterwards,
Thank you.
I know you have it, but
Thank you.
pass it around. Thank you.
So when's your next?
So there is no more
Wait,
negative.
Public portion is
For
closed.
public
You can
portion
ask
is
them afterwards.
closed.
You got it, you got it.
Now I would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say yea.
Yeah.
Any opposed? The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. So.
No, thank you. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, David.